The Voight Decision, a turning point for Native American-white relations. During the 1980s in northern Wisconsin, violent scenes of protesting against the Chippewa Native Americans' treaty rights erupted at many local boat landings. Northern Wisconsin was even referred to as the Mississippi of the North by the Lakeland Times. The lack of understanding the Chippewas' tribal sovereignty and culture led to the high tensions between Wisconsin and the Chippewa when their treaty rights were reaffirmed by the Voight Decision in 1983.
To me, it may mean I don't like Indians. Maybe it'll mean I do like Indians. Maybe it means I don't like them spearing fish.
We're not fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for the state of Wisconsin.
They say it looks on us that treaty rights are supreme law of the land. And we take that to heart because this is something that we have with America today.
The Voight Decision was a turning point that forced a positive change in the way that the Chippewa Native Americans interacted with the citizens of Wisconsin. The utmost good faith shall always be observed toward the Indians. Their land shall never be taken from them without their consent. Their property, rights, and liberty shall never be invaded. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787. The Native Americans in the Great Lakes region called themselves the Anishinaabe or Ojibwe prior to the defeat of the Ojibwe's British allies in the War of 1812. This loss led to American settlers moving west that were eager to strip the land of its natural resources, and the Ojibwe to be renamed their English name Chippewa. To gain control of the natural resources in the Great Lakes region, the United States government prompted the Chippewa to sign the Cession Treaties of 1836, 1837, 1842, and 1854. Those treaties sold more than 19 million acres in the territories of Michigan, Minnesota, and Wisconsin.
We have a holocaust upon us as Indian people, how they stole our lands. You know, sometimes with the saber or with the rifle, but most of the time they stole our lands with a pen.
In all of the treaties, it stated that the Chippewa still had the right to hunt, fish, and gather anywhere on the ceded land. As more people came to reside in Wisconsin, the Industrial Revolution quickly diffused into the state. This was the turning point for Wisconsin because new technologies and services attracted people to move into urban areas. Residents in the Midwest started to seasonally vacation in northern Wisconsin. The desire to visit northern Wisconsin essentially started the state's tourism industry.
There was this new growing economic sector and it needed to be protected. That's where you get the State Conservation Code in. And the State Conservation Code totally ignored treaty rights.
Even through attempts to Americanize the Chippewa in the 20th century, the Indians still preserved their culture through oral stories and depended on the resources of the land.
You know, those animals don't need us. We need them to survive. And that's why we talk about the walleye, the different fish on there as sort of like medicine fish to us as Ojibwe people.
In 1974, to utilize civil disobedience, the Lacoudere brothers Fred and Mike Tribble were arrested on Chief Lake in Surrey County, Wisconsin for off-reservation spearing.
So we wanted to bring it to the attention and get it in court and get it resolved one way or the other.
In 1975, the Lacoudere Band of Chippewa argued in federal court that their rights to hunt, fish, and gather were protected. But Judge James Doyle disagreed and ruled that the Treaty of 1854 canceled any reserved treaty rights. Together, the 6 Wisconsin Chippewa tribes appealed the ruling to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 7th Circuit.
The 7th Court of Appeals in Chicago takes the case and in 1983 affirms the Ojibwe's right to hunt, fish, and gather.
The Voight Decision was upheld after the U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear the case.
And there's nothing in the treaty that says that they did understand that. We have to interpret a treaty the way the Indians would have understood it. They didn't understand they were giving up that. So the Court of Appeals sent it back.
Judge Doyle created a 3-phase plan to determine the extent and regulation of the Chippewa treaty rights. In 1991, Judge Barbara Crabb completed the 3-phase plan that was begun by Judge Doyle in 1987. Shortly after the Voight Decision in 1983, there was a huge outcry in northern Wisconsin as the Chippewa began to practice their freedom to hunt, fish, and gather. The non-Indians believed that the Chippewa relinquished their native rights when they became United States citizens. Others thought that the Chippewa should be using birch bark canoes and torches for nighttime spearfishing instead of using modern equipment. Wisconsinites were also against the reaffirmation of treaty rights because the Chippewa could take the entire quota of many popular Wisconsin game fish and half of the deer tags. This would greatly reduce the fish and game limits for sportsmen. They worried that if the fish and game populations decreased, so would the tourism in northern Wisconsin.
This action out here by these tribal people on these waters has already definitely hurt Wisconsin. This is not an issue of fishing anymore. This is an issue of straight money. M-O-N-E-Y, money.
Now you place that over northern Wisconsin, which has always had a seasonal economy, always been challenged economically, and now one of the key industries, tourism, is going to take a hit.
Propaganda coming from organizations that were formed, such as Stop Treaty Abuse Wisconsin, known as STAW, and Protect Americans' Rights and Resources, influenced some Wisconsinites to act irrationally. The founder of STAW, Dean Christ, created treaty beer by donations from out-of-state organizations and led STAW in many violent protests at local boat landings.
They desperately try and make it a racial issue. It wouldn't make any difference if it was the Aryan nation out there taking 100% of the resource or the Chippewa nation.
Protesters would try to disrupt the water around the spearfishers using large boats and planting concrete walleye in the water to try to damage the Native Americans' equipment. They would also throw rocks and shout racial obscenities toward the Chippewa when they would see them unload their dozens of fish and report their catches. When in fact, according to the Wisconsin DNR, the Chippewa took only 2% of the walleye harvest. The authorities would do their best to try to protect the Chippewa at boat landings, but most of the time they were outnumbered by protesters. The Chippewa remained nonviolent and received some support from the American Indian movement and students who acted as witnesses to prosecute the violent protesters.
Governor Thompson went to federal court and asked Judge Barbara Crabb for an injunction, not against the people that were breaking the law, asked for an injunction against the Ojibwe to keep them from spearfishing, saying that our spearfishing had created a dangerous situation that threatened health and safety.
Judge Crabb declined the injunction. After the final ruling by Judge Crabb in 1991, the violence at boat landings decreased when the Chippewa and the Wisconsin DNR started to annually negotiate rational quotas.
If the tribes declare X amount in the lake, the walleye bank limit will be either 4, 3, 2, or 1 for the state anglers. And the tribe gets to determine what it is. The one line they can't go below is if they declare too much so that the state anglers would have to go with a zero bank limit. It has to be a shared resource.
By 1999, the Chippewa in Michigan, Minnesota, and Wisconsin had their treaty rights reaffirmed. Prior to the Chippewa getting their treaty rights reaffirmed, their tribal reservations were without a strong and productive tribal government.
So, it's a situation where these tribes have really expanded their economic, political, legal powers, and in doing so, though, they've created jobs, they have expanded fish hatcheries, they've expanded natural resource, things such as reseeding wild rice. They work cooperatively with state and federal agencies
to manage the natural resources on the ceded land with the Department of Natural Resources of Michigan, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. The 11 Chippewa tribes in 1984 established the Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission. GLFWIC was also created to educate the public and to implement the Chippewa treaty rights. Even with the careful management of the natural resources in northern Wisconsin, there is still an uneasiness between the Chippewa and some Wisconsin sportsmen. Since the reemergence of the Chippewa treaty rights, a cultural renaissance has been taking place in the Chippewa communities due to a better understanding of the rights that the Chippewa have. Act 31 became a law in Wisconsin in 1989 that requires students to learn about Chippewa culture, treaty rights, and tribal sovereignty in schools.
The first thing that it did is it required the state superintendent to partner with the American Indian Language and Culture Education Board to create curriculum materials on Chippewa treaty rights.
The Voight Decision was a turning point that has changed the way that the people of Wisconsin interact with the Chippewa Native Americans. It is helping bring Wisconsin and the Chippewa together to share resources, cultures, and improve governments in a way to accommodate the rights given to the Chippewa nearly 150 years ago.